Before chess, before cards, before any board game you've ever played, there was a small cube with dots, and its story stretches back 5,000 years. It begins not with a cube, but with a bone. Specifically, the knuckle bone of a sheep, small, irregular, with 4 distinct landing faces. Shepherds across the ancient Middle East discovered that a tossed knuckle bone landed in one of 4 unpredictable ways. That unpredictability was intoxicating. By at least 5,000 years ago, people across Mesopotamia, Egypt, and the Indus Valley were using knuckle bones to decide outcomes: games, disputes, divine will. Then came what may be among the oldest true dice ever found. At a site in southeastern Iran called Shahri Sukhte, the burnt city, archaeologists uncovered something extraordinary. The burnt city dated to roughly 2,800 BCE. Among its artifacts was a small, elongated die, carved from wood and etched with symbols. Beside the die lay a game board and 60 gaming pieces. It wasn't just a random object, it was evidence of an actual game being played. And this wasn't a fluke. Excavations across Mesopotamia and the Indus Valley have unearthed dice from roughly the same era, made from bone, clay, ivory, and wood. But here's what's strange. These early dice weren't cubes. They came in elongated, pyramidal, and tetrahedral forms. The 6-sided cube took centuries to dominate. Egypt adopted randomizing objects early. The game of Senet, one of the oldest board games on record, used throwing sticks and later dice to move pieces across a board. Senet boards were buried with pharaohs. We've found them in tombs dating to around 3,500 BCE. The Egyptians believed the game mirrored the soul's journey through the afterlife. By classical Greece, dice had evolved into something familiar. The Greeks called them kubos, cubes, and gambled with them ferociously, in homes, in temples, in the open street. Greek mythology credited dice to the god Palames, who supposedly invented them to entertain soldiers during the siege of Troy. A convenient story, and almost certainly invented. Rome took gambling to another level. Dice games were among the empire's most popular pastimes, and also technically illegal for most of the Roman calendar. Roman law banned dice gambling except during the festival of Saturnalia each December. Romans played anyway. The fines were rarely levied. Nobody really cared. Multiple emperors were known gamblers. Augustus kept dice in his personal belongings. Claudius was so obsessed he reportedly wrote a book about dice games. Caligula was accused of cheating. In 49 BCE, Julius Caesar crossed the Rubicon River with his army, an act of open treason. According to Suetonius, Caesar declared, "Alia iacta est," the die is cast. That single moment gave the world one of its most enduring expressions. When Caesar said it, he meant there was no going back. The gamble had been made. The Romans churned out dice in enormous quantities. Archaeologists have found them by the thousands across the former empire, in barracks, bathhouses, brothels, and buried under homes. Roman dice were made from bone, ivory, amber, and crystal, and many were loaded. Shaved, drilled, or weighted, cheating at dice is as ancient as the dice themselves. When the Western Roman Empire collapsed in the 5th century, gambling culture fragmented across Europe. But dice didn't disappear. They traveled north with merchants, soldiers, and migrants. The Norse had their own relationship with chance. Viking runic divination used carved pieces tossed or drawn to read fate, a spiritual cousin of the die, if not the same thing. But the Norse also played dice in the straightforward sense. Archaeologists have found 6-sided dice at Viking Age sites across Scandinavia, typically carved from bone or antler. By the early medieval period, dice had found their permanent home, the tavern. Across Europe, ordinary people gambled at dice with an intensity that alarmed the church. The Catholic Church condemned dice gambling in council after council, in papal letters, in sermons. Priests were explicitly forbidden from playing. The prohibitions had approximately zero effect. Medieval taverns ran on crooked dice. Loaded with lead, shaved on an edge, drilled and refilled, court records from 13th century England are filled with dice fraud prosecutions. Medieval English developed vocabulary for the tricks. Fulhams were dice loaded with lead. Langrettes were trimmed to favor a face. Shakespeare himself mentions fulhams in The Merry Wives of Windsor. But here's something most people have never thought about. The dots on a die, which face gets how many, weren't always arranged the way you see them today. Two major traditions emerged across Eurasia. In the Western system, opposite faces sum to 7, one face is 6, two faces 5, three faces 4. This is the arrangement you know. In the Eastern tradition, used historically in China and parts of South Asia, the layout was different. 1 faced 2, 3 faced 4, 5 faced 6. A parallel universe of dice. The Western arrangement wasn't consistently used across Europe until roughly the 14th century. Before then, you could pick up 2 dice in the same tavern with completely different dot configurations. Making opposite faces sum to 7 has a satisfying mathematical elegance, but practically, it may have made tampered dice easier to spot, a clever built-in integrity check. The word pip for each individual dot appears in English by at least the 16th century. Before that, the marks were called points or spots. The origin of pip itself is genuinely unclear. Through the medieval and early modern eras, dice were handmade by specialist craftsmen. In France, they were called table tiers. Paris had entire guilds devoted to the trade by the 13th century. For most of history, dice were carved from cattle bone. Ivory became fashionable among wealthier players in the early modern period. Then celluloid arrived in the late 19th century and changed everything. Modern casino dice are engineering achievements. Made from transparent cellulose acetate, machined to within 1/10,000th of an inch, and checked with calipers. Most casinos swap them out every 8 hours. Drilling pips into a die removes material, making the 6 face slightly lighter than the 1 face. Casino dice compensate by filling each pip with a material matched to the die's exact density. Mass-production plastic dice arrived in the mid-20th century. Suddenly, a die cost fractions of a cent to manufacture. The global board game industry grew up around that fact. No one has a precise count, but the dice manufacturing industry estimates that hundreds of billions of dice have been produced in the plastic era alone. The number is staggering. Every Monopoly set, every Yahtzee box, every Dungeons & Dragons campaign, every Las Vegas casino floor, they all trace a direct line back to a knucklebone tossed in ancient Iran. When Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson launched Dungeons & Dragons in 1974, they didn't limit themselves to 6 sides. They pulled ancient geometric forms back into use: 4-sided, 12-sided, 20-sided. The 20-sided die has its own deep history. A Ptolemaic-era icosahedron, over 2,000 years old, sits today in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. And for all our technology, we still haven't fundamentally improved on the invention. A die remains exactly what it always was: a portable, handheld device for generating a random number. Every time you roll one, you're continuing something ancient, an acknowledgement that some outcomes lie beyond your control, that there are forces bigger than calculation. That fate gets a vote. Caesar invoked the die before crossing the Rubicon. Roman soldiers invoked it before their next throw. You invoke something similar every time you pick one up and let it go. A sheep's knucklebone in ancient Mesopotamia, became an ivory cube in a Roman bathhouse, a carved antler chip in a Viking longhouse, and a plastic square in your kitchen junk drawer. The shape changed, the material changed, the game changed, but the question at the center of it never did: what number will it land on? This is Origins. Subscribe and come back tomorrow. There's a new origin every single morning.